What's up, guys? It's Barrett, and today I wanted to talk about flams. It's funny because flams come from the traditions of rudiments, right? And so in the rudiments, traditionally speaking, the first part of a flam is really setting it up with the correct stick height. And so I have my grace note down here, lower to the drum, and this is really the first time where stick control and stick height become important when a drummer is studying drums. So my grace note is controlled lower to the drum, while my primary note, which is what the flam is called, so in this case, this is my right hand, so this would be a right hand flam, because the right hand is the primary note. So what you do when you play a flam is you play your grace note first, then you play your primary note. So grace note and then primary. And the goal, just like with any grace note in music, is you're trying to get the note right before the note you're really trying to point the ear towards, right? So that was right flam, and this is a left flam. A left flam is where your right hand is now the grace note, and your left hand is the primary note. In other words, no matter what flam you do, the grace note always plays first. Right flam, left flam. I think one of the most important things that's left out about playing flams is that there's a style to a flam, right? Don't just play what's on the page and don't just play a grace note and a primary note. Really allow that flam to have some body to it, because the whole point of playing the articulation of a flam to begin with is we're trying to thicken up the note, right? When we put a flam on a note, we're trying to thicken it up, you know? THICCC, you feel me? So this would be a right flam, this would be a left. So what you do is you just practice those one at a time. Practice getting your right flam comfortable. Practice getting your left flam comfortable. And this is going to take some time, because naturally you're not going to naturally put your sticks at this stick height to prepare the flam first. Then naturally you're not going to always play your grace note first, followed by your primary note. And so you kind of have to train your muscle memory to essentially know how to play a flam well, right? The other thing about playing a more traditional rudimental style flam is that you also want the style of it to be, you want the notes to be a certain amount of apart from each other, and you want the primary note to literally sound like a primary note. Don't have your primary note come down and sound like a grace note. So all these little details really come to matter. The distance between the two notes and the idea behind the sound of each note. Grace note essentially being like a tap or a ghost note if we think about it in a groove context, right? But we call it a grace note in a flam. Well, what's funny about all that is a tap and a grace note and a ghost note are all basically the same thing. They're just different contexts. It's just a low controlled stick height. That's all it is. But the primary note is essentially a regular stroke where you play and you can either stop the stick or you can let it rebound, whatever. But you know, more professionally, you stop the stick lower to the head so you can be ready to play other taps or grace notes if you do flams back and forth. So the point is, when you practice flams, you want to practice one at a time first. Try to get it to sound nice and bleh, bleh, bleh. You want it to have a little bit of body to it. You don't want this. That's too close together. It's boring. There's a lot of things you don't want when you're practicing a flam. You don't want this. You don't want this. Because then your primary note doesn't really sound like a primary note. And so those little details really do matter to give you a nice body of a correct flam, correct sounding flam. Now, once you get comfortable with both of your flams, then you do what's called alternating flams, which is where you go back and forth. Right flam, left flam. Right flam, left flam. This can take some time and some practice, because I'm literally changing the stick height every single time, right? Another thing about this is I'm leaving my note down all the time, and that helps me create a flam, because eventually you learn other rudiments like flam taps where you need that primary note to be down for the next note. So right flam, right, left flam, left. And the second note is just basically like a regular kind of note. It's not a grace note and it's not a primary note. It's just a regular sounding note, you know? This is called flam taps. So the point is, you practice alternating flams back and forth so that you can then play other flam rudiments, because all the other flam rudiments, basically almost all of them have the foundation of that alternating flam. And this goes back to why rudiments are important to practice, because in a rudimental sense, we're always practicing anything on one hand the same amount as we do on the other hand. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Do drum set players actually utilize that style of flam all the time? Well, they can, right? If they're doing a more traditional style sound in the first place. That's the only way you're going to get a traditional march style, is if you do a real flam, okay? But what's funny is flams over time developed, especially in like rock and country and stuff, into both stick heights being the same, but you still have that spacing is the same as the traditional flam. And what that does is it just creates a more powerful, more accented type flam. It's not the same as a traditional flam though. And I don't know why we don't just accept this in the drumming world. There's the traditional flam, rudimental, band, concert, orchestra, whatever you want to call it. That's what kind of flam this is. Then there's a more of a drum set flam. They're not the same thing. A drum set flam, which means what we use most of the time in the context of playing drum set and rock and country and such, is going to have the same stick height on both hands, but the same spacing as a traditional flam for the most part. And maybe even a little bit farther out than a traditional flam spacing between the notes. And most of the time, more of a drum set style flam is followed with a bass drum. Not always, but. And this is where you get into the style I talk about a lot called flam bass. Flam bass, flam bass, flam bass, flam bass. So I wanted to make this video to just make it really clear that there are two different styles of flams. You have the more traditional flam, which you should practice for a rudimental purpose, because there's all kinds of rudiments that are really important to practice. And you can use a traditional style flam on the kit, you know. It's going to give you a different sound than that more drum set style flam that we hear in like rock music and stuff, right? But you can still utilize a traditional flam around a kit for sure. So yeah, there's really two different styles of flams, and it's important to practice both. Don't just be a drum set player and just practice the one where your hands are both the same height. Practice the traditional rudimental flam, which makes you have to control your motions more and your stick heights and your stick control in general. In my book, I have a whole page on just a bunch of different flam rudimental things you can practice. Of course, you want to get the basic flam down before you do that. But yeah, if you're interested, link is in my bio. Thanks for watching, guys. I just wanted to make it really clear that, you know, as a drum set player, it's important to always respect the history of where this instrument came from, because it's lots of different instruments put together, really. And at the end of the day, technique-wise, we're snare players, right? And so we have to respect the rudiments and respect the history of where snare came from and the style and the technique of all of that stuff. Even though drum set is sort of a different instrument with different contexts musically, it's still important for us to have that snare background and context so that we can then make decisions on what style we need at what time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.